reservation had been made 6 weeks in advance. That was how Emma Carter operated. Every variable accounted for, every contingency mapped. The corner booth at Thornfield, tucked behind a partition of frosted glass and trailing ivy, far enough from the main floor to conduct business without being overheard, had been her preferred location for sensitive negotiations since the restaurant opened 4 years ago. She had eaten here with senators, with venture capitalists who controlled portfolios larger than the GDP of small nations, with board members who smiled like sharks and blinked like accountants. Tonight was no different. Across from her sat Gerald Whitmore, 62, silver-haired, with the kind of tan that came from yacht decks rather than labor. Beside him, his legal counsel, a compact man named Preston Hale, who had not stopped clicking his pen since they sat down, and a silent woman in a gray blazer, who Emma suspected was either a financial analyst or a professional witness. Neither had been introduced. The contract on the table was worth $430 million. Emma had not looked at it in 40 minutes. She had already read it. Twice. She had her corrections and counteroffers memorized, arranged in order of priority, rehearsed as responses to every angle Whitmore might take. This was how she worked. Her assistant, Janelle, often said that Emma Carter didn't walk into rooms. She arrived at conclusions, and the room simply caught up. Outside, rain traced thin lines down the tall windows of Thornfield. The city beyond was a smear of amber and gray, headlights bleeding through the wet glass. Inside, the lighting was warm and low, the kind of lighting that cost a great deal of money to look effortless. Emma lifted her glass of sparkling water and listened to Whitmore make his case for the 3rd time. He was a good talker. Most men who had spent 40 years in acquisition were. They learned to fill silence with a particular brand of confident noise, to keep the air occupied so that doubt couldn't find a foothold. Emma had learned, long ago, to hear the spaces between words rather than the words themselves. Whitmore's pauses told her everything. He wanted this deal more than he was showing. The pen clicking told her the lawyer was nervous. The silent woman in gray had not looked at Emma directly in 20 minutes, which meant she'd already been told not to. Emma set her glass down and prepared to respond. That was when she heard the laugh. It came from the other side of the restaurant, not loud, not disruptive, just present in a way that cut through the engineered ambiance of Thornfield like a real thing interrupting a carefully constructed dream. A child's laugh, high and completely unguarded. She didn't turn her head. Not yet, but something in her attention, some old, rarely used antenna, swiveled in that direction. The tax structure alone gives us significant leverage, Whitmore was saying. Emma, I heard you, she said. Go on. She kept her eyes on him. But the laugh happened again, softer this time, followed by the low murmur of a man's voice telling what sounded like a very bad joke, delivered with complete sincerity. Emma Carter had dined with presidents. She had never turned her head during a negotiation. She turned her head. Across the restaurant, tucked against the far wall near the window, was a table clearly intended for 2, a small corner space with an uneven view of the rain-soaked street, set with silverware that had been slightly rearranged, forks moved, a water glass relocated to the edge to make room for 2 small people who did not quite fit the architecture of the space. The man seated there was perhaps 35, dressed in a dark blue jacket that was clean but not new, his collar open at the throat. He had the kind of face that looked like it had laughed a great deal in better years and was only recently remembering how. His hair was slightly too long. His posture subtly tired, the particular tiredness that wasn't physical but structural, built into the way a person held their shoulders after carrying too much for too long. Across from him sat 2 children. A girl, perhaps 8 or 9, with a dark braid pinned to one side and enormous eyes that were currently fixed on something outside the window. A boy, younger 6, maybe with a gap where his front tooth should have been and a small hand wrapped around a bread roll like it was something precious. Emma watched the man cut something on his plate. Then she watched him slide the larger portion toward the girl without breaking the sentence he was in the middle of. The girl didn't notice, or she was used to it. The boy looked up at his father with an expression that had no name in the language of boardrooms, something between trust and hunger, and the absolute certainty that this person would handle everything. The man continued his story. Something about a dragon. Or possibly a dinosaur. Emma was too far to hear clearly. Gerald Whitmore said something about projected margins. Emma said, "Give me a moment." She told herself she was only looking because the contrast was interesting. She was a person who noticed contrast. It was, in fact, a professional skill. The ability to identify asymmetry, to locate the thing that didn't fit the established pattern, was what had made her company what it was. That was what she told herself. But the man across the restaurant was doing something that she found, to her own bewilderment, difficult to look away from. He was present. Not performing presence, not the careful, curated attentiveness of a business lunch or a managed interaction, but genuinely, completely there. His phone was face down on the table and had not moved. When the little girl said something, he turned to her with his whole body, not just his head. When the boy knocked over his water glass, a small catastrophe that sent both children into a frozen moment of anxiety, the man simply caught the glass before it fell, righted it, and kept talking as though nothing had happened. The boy relaxed. Emma watched that happen. The specific physics of a child's fear dissolving because a trusted adult had signaled, without words, that the world was still intact. She could not remember the last time she had eaten dinner without a phone, a contract, or a strategy. She turned back to Whitmore. "The tax structure is contingent on the acquisition timeline," she said, picking up exactly where she'd left off. "If you want the structure, you accept the timeline. They're not separable." Whitmore frowned. His lawyer stopped clicking the pen. Emma answered 3 more questions. She signed nothing. She agreed to reconvene the following week, and she kept, in the peripheral edge of her attention, a tab on the table by the window. The man was telling a new story now. She could see the children leaning forward. The girl had abandoned her bread entirely, and the boy's mouth was slightly open, that trusting, anticipatory gap of a person waiting for the best part. The man raised both hands, made a shape with them. The boy erupted into laughter again. Emma felt something strange happen in her chest. Not painful, just unexpected. Like finding a room in a house you thought you knew completely. She had grown up in Connecticut, the only child of 2 lawyers who had loved her efficiently and kept excellent files. She had been educated at schools that prepared children for excellence and rewarded emotional containment. She had built a company from 11 people in a leased office in Austin to a global technology firm with 4,000 employees, and a valuation that appeared regularly in publications she had stopped reading because they made her feel like a character in a story rather than a person. She did not, as a rule, watch strangers in restaurants, but the man by the window was laughing now too quietly, with his eyes at something the boy had said, and the specific quality of that laugh made her hand stop moving, because she had heard that laugh before. She was almost certain of it. The fork she was holding rested against the rim of her plate. She looked at the man more carefully. The angle was wrong. The light from the window was behind him, making his face harder to read. She could see the line of his jaw, the way he held his shoulders, the gesture he made with his left hand when he was explaining something. Her fork slipped. It hit the edge of the plate with a clean, clear note that made Whitmore pause mid-sentence. "Emma?" She did not answer immediately, because the man across the restaurant had just turned his head not toward her, toward the window, and for 1 full second, she had seen his profile clearly. "It's him." The thought arrived, not as a question, but as a fact, delivered with the cold certainty of something that had been waiting 5 years to be confirmed. The memory did not arrive gradually. It came all at once, the way certain things do not a sequence, but a single complete image, fully formed, as though it had been preserved exactly as it happened. She had been 31. It was October, and she had been leaving a conference in Denver, an event she had attended not because she needed to network, but because her CFO at the time, a careful man named Elliot, had suggested that visibility mattered at certain stages of growth, and she had agreed without particularly caring. She had taken a car from the venue. The driver had been distracted. The intersection had been wet. The rest happened in fragments she had never been able to fully reconstruct. The impact, the glass, the cold of the pavement through her jacket, the particular quality of silence that follows sudden violence, and then, cutting through that silence, a voice. Calm, certain, close. "Don't move. I've got you. Don't move." She had not moved. She had focused on the voice the way a person focuses on a fixed point when the world is tilting, because it was the only stable thing available. The voice had kept talking, not frantically, not with the performed urgency of someone trying to seem helpful, but with the level, unhurried authority of someone who had decided, without drama, that she was going to be fine and was simply waiting for her body to catch up. The paramedics had arrived. There had been questions, blankets, a neck brace applied as a precaution. By the time Emma had understood what had happened fully enough to look for the man who had kept her company in the dark and the cold and the shock, he was gone, she had asked. Twice. No one at the scene knew who he was. She had thought about him, afterward, more than she would have expected. Not obsessively, she was not built for obsession, but with the specific, unresolved quality of an open file, a thing that had no conclusion. She had told herself it didn't matter. She had been wrong, because the thing the man had said, the particular phrase he had used, quiet and matter-of-fact, when she had asked if she was going to be okay. "You're still here. That means the hard part's already done." She had heard those exact words tonight, murmured to a small boy who had knocked over his water glass and looked, for one terrifying second, like he might cry. "You're still here. That means the hard part's already done." Emma Carter set her napkin on the table. "Excuse me," she said to Gerald Whitmore. He looked at her. His lawyer looked at her. The silent woman in gray looked at her. "Emma, we haven't." "I know," she said. "I'll call you Monday." She stood up. Thornfield was not a large restaurant, but in the moment it felt like a considerable distance. She was aware, in a detached way, of the attention that followed her, the slight shift in the room's atmosphere, as a woman who was recognizable to roughly half the people present stood up from a high-profile table mid-negotiation and walked, without apparent urgency but with absolute direction, toward the far wall. She did not hurry. Hurrying would have looked like emotion, and she wasn't ready to call what she was feeling by that name yet. The man by the window had not seen her coming. He was listening to the girl, the one with the braid, describe something with considerable intensity, her small hands making expansive shapes in the air above the breadbasket. The boy had his chin in his hand and was watching his sister with the patient skepticism of a younger sibling who has heard this kind of claim before. Emma stopped 2 feet from the table. The girl noticed her first. The hands stilled. The boy looked up. Then the man turned. Up close, he was more familiar and more specific, at the same time older than she'd imagined him in memory, with lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago or hadn't been visible in the dark and the rain. His eyes were a particular shade of gray-blue that she registered with a strange sense of recognition, as though she had been matching other eyes against this standard for years without knowing it. He looked at her the way people look at something that doesn't quite belong in their immediate geography. Not unfriendly, not afraid, uncertain. "Hi," the boy said. "Hi," Emma said to him. Then she looked at the man. "That's okay," the man said. His voice was careful. And there it was, the voice. Not the content of the words, which were polite and neutral and gave nothing away, but the particular quality of it, the specific frequency that she had held in her memory like a tuning fork for 5 years. Her throat did something complicated. "I think," she said, "that you helped me a long time ago." His name, she would learn, was Daniel Hargrove. He did not confirm this immediately. For a moment, a long, careful moment, he simply looked at her with an expression that contained several things at once. Recognition, yes, but also wariness, and something else she couldn't name yet. A kind of preemptive fatigue, as though he had anticipated this conversation and was already tired of it. "I don't know what you mean," he said. It was not a convincing denial. He wasn't trying to make it convincing. He was, she understood, simply establishing that this was the direction he intended to go, and she could decide whether to respect it. The girl was watching both of them with the sharp, unblinking attention of a child who has learned to read rooms. "Denver," Emma said quietly. "October. 5 years ago. A car accident on Meridian Street." Silence. The boy put down his bread roll. The girl's eyes moved from Emma to her father and back again. Daniel Hargrove looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up. "My kids are here," he said. "I know. I'm sorry." She meant it. I heard you say something you said that night, and I needed to know if I was wrong." "Are you?" Another silence. The rain against the window filled it. "Daddy," the boy said, in the tone of a child who doesn't like silences that don't involve him. "Do you know her?" Daniel looked at his son. Something shifted in his face, the wariness softened. Not because it had been overcome, but because the boy had made it irrelevant for a moment. "I'm not sure, buddy," he said. "I'm Emma," she said to the boy. "I'm Cooper," he said. "That's Lily." He pointed at his sister with a bread roll. Lily gave a small, reserved nod that suggested she was reserving judgment. "Nice to meet you both," Emma said. She looked at Daniel. "Would it be all right if I sat down? Just for a minute?" He studied her. She understood that she was being assessed not for her net worth or her title, or any of the things that made other people in this restaurant treat her with careful deference, but for something older and simpler. Whether she was a person who could be trusted with the small and fragile thing that this table represented. "5 minutes," he said. She sat. She told him what she remembered. Quietly, with the table between them and his children present, and the rain still going outside. She told him about the car, the pavement, the voice in the dark. She told him about looking for him afterward and finding nothing, no name, no contact, no way to close the loop. She told him about the phrase, "You're still here. That means the hard part's already done." He listened without interrupting. His hands were around his coffee cup and his eyes were on the table. And when she finished, he was quiet for long enough that Cooper quietly stole a piece of bread from the basket, and Lily pretended not to notice. "I wasn't looking to be thanked," he said finally. "I know. It wasn't." He paused, started again. "It was just what anyone would have done." "It wasn't," Emma said. "You stayed. You kept talking. The paramedics told me afterward that the way you kept me calm and still probably prevented a spinal injury from becoming something worse." She paused. "I've known that for 5 years. I didn't know who to direct it to." He was quiet again. "You disappeared before I could even see your face properly." "Yeah," he said. "I had somewhere to be." She waited. The quality of his silence told her there was more. "My wife called," he said. She was already sick at that point. Not critical, but she had a doctor's appointment the next morning and she was anxious about going alone. He looked at Cooper, who was now engaged in a highly focused examination of his plate. "I had to get back." Emma said nothing. She let the sentence stand. "She died 14 months later," he said. It was not said for sympathy. It was said the way people state coordinates, "This is where we are, this is how we got here." Lily, who Emma had thought was not listening, reached across the table and put her small hand over her father's. She did not look up from her plate. It was an old, practiced gesture, the gesture of a child who had done this many times and had learned exactly how much pressure to use. Daniel turned his hand over and held his daughter's fingers. Emma looked away. At the window. At the rain. She felt, with some precision, that she was in the presence of something real. The kind of real that her life, for all its accomplishments, had been arranging itself around without ever quite touching. "I'm sorry," she said. "About your wife. Thank you. A beat." Her name was Claire, Lily said, still looking at her plate. She liked lavender. She had a garden. She sounds lovely, Emma said. She was, said Cooper, with the simple conviction of someone who has no reason to qualify things. The 5 minutes became 15. She wasn't sure how it happened, not through any deliberate extension on either of their parts, but through the natural gravity of a conversation that had more weight than either of them had prepared for. Cooper told her, unprompted, that he was in first grade, that his teacher's name was Mrs. Abernethy, and that dinosaurs were better than dragons because they were real, and realness mattered. He said this with the conviction of a philosopher who has arrived at a position after serious deliberation and is not particularly interested in counter-arguments. Lily said nothing for several minutes, and then, with great precision, asked Emma what she did for work. Emma considered how to answer. "I run a company," she said. "What kind?" Lily asked. "The kind that helps other companies keep their information organized and safe." Lily considered this. "My dad fixes things," she said. "Mechanical things. He's very good at it." "I believe it," Emma said. Daniel looked faintly embarrassed. "I own a repair shop," he said. "Hargrove Mechanical. Small operation." "How long?" 3 years. "Before that I was in the Navy. Structural engineering. Mostly maintenance." He said it simply, without the self-deprecating qualification that some men used when they felt their work would be judged. He was not, she observed, someone who performed his own modesty. He stated his history the way a craftsman might show you the tools on his bench. "Here is what I have, here is what I use, here is what I do with them." "Do you like it?" she asked. The shop. He thought about it. Actually thought about it. With the same full attention he gave to everything, not reaching for the easy, reassuring answer. "Yeah," he said. "I like knowing what's broken and being able to fix it. I like that when something leaves my shop it works. When the day's done, I know whether it was a good day or a bad day because the work tells me." A pause. "It's honest." The word landed between them. Emma thought about her day. The negotiation. The $430 million. The question of whether the tax structure was separable from the timeline. The hours she had spent in the week prior preparing counteroffers for a man whose primary interest was in appearing to give more than he was giving. The meeting before the meeting, where she and Janelle had gamed out 17 possible directions the conversation could take and prepared responses to each. The practiced pauses she used to create the impression of deliberation when she had already decided. She thought about what it would feel like to know, at the end of a day, simply whether the work had been done or hadn't. Honest. She wanted to say something, but Daniel had shifted the warmth that had briefly opened in the conversation, pulled back slightly, like a tide. "You should get back to your table," he said. "I'm done there." He looked at her with something that might have been skepticism. "You walked out of a business meeting." "I did." For this, he was quiet. She could see him working through it, not in an unflattering way, not suspicion exactly, but the careful wariness of someone who has learned that when things seem to shift in your favor, without apparent reason, it's worth understanding why. "I'm not looking for anything," Emma said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not here because I want something from you." She paused. "I've had 5 years of not knowing who you were, and I heard your voice 20 minutes ago. And I needed to close that open file. That's all." "People with money," Daniel said, carefully, "usually want something. That's fair. I've had 3 people in the last 2 years offer to invest in the shop. Buy me out. Franchise the thing. People who thought they were helping." He looked at the table. They weren't helping. They were acquiring. "I understand the difference," Emma said. "I've been on both sides of it." Something in the directness of that seemed to land. He didn't soften, exactly, but he recalibrated slightly, the way a person does when they're revising their initial read of a situation. Cooper, who had finished everything on his plate and was now resting his head on his father's arm, said, "Dad, can I have dessert? What do you think?" "Bud?" "Yes," Cooper said. Bold answer. "Thank you." Despite everything, Emma laughed. It came out of her before she could decide whether to allow it a real laugh, short and surprised. Daniel looked at her. She looked back. "Let me get the check," she said. "Please." Not a grand gesture. "Just dinner." "No," he said. "Daniel." "No," he said, again, without heat. "We don't need that." The way he said it, "we don't need that," wasn't proud or defensive. It was just true. She saw that immediately. "Okay," she said. She sat for another moment. She didn't know what she had expected from this conversation. She hadn't expected anything, which was unusual for her. She was a person who modeled outcomes. "I'm going to give you my card," she said. "Not because I want anything, because I'd like to know that the man who kept me from a spinal cord injury is okay, and his kids are okay." She paused. "You don't have to call." He looked at the card she placed on the table. He didn't pick it up. "We're okay," he said. "Good," she said. She meant it. She stood to go. "Emma." She stopped. He hadn't used her name until now. "Why did it matter?" he asked. "Knowing who I was." After 5 years. It was a good question, an honest one. She thought about it for a moment, really thought. The way she'd seen him do when Lily asked about her work. "Because, I think," she said slowly, "I've spent a long time knowing the value of everything, and not knowing why any of it mattered. And that night, the voice in the dark. The person who stayed that was one of the only moments I remember clearly when something just mattered, without being about anything else." She stopped. "I wanted to know what that was. What kind of person?" She nodded once and walked back across the restaurant. She made it to the entrance before she stopped. Her coat was in her hands and the maitre d' was already signaling for the car. And she was standing in the amber glow of the entrance, looking out at the rain on the sidewalk and thinking about a word. "Honest." She turned around. She walked back through Thornfield, past the tables, past the bar, past the frosted glass partition, where Whitmore's table was now being cleared by a young man with a careful posture, and she went back to the corner by the window. Daniel looked up. He was signing the check. Cooper had fallen asleep against his shoulder. The boy's full weight committed to his father with the totality that only children and animals manage. Lily was staring out the window at the rain. Emma stood there. She was not, in general, a person who stood in front of people without knowing what she was going to say. It was, in fact, one of the things she most strictly avoided. She prepared. She structured. She controlled the terms of every entry she made. But she had nothing prepared. "I want to say something," she said, "and I want to say it honestly, which means it might come out badly." Daniel waited. "I think you're right that we don't belong to the same world," she said. "That's probably true in most of the ways that matter practically. I'm not going to pretend otherwise." She paused. "But I also think that the reason I've spent 5 years thinking about a voice in the dark is that something in me knew it was the most real thing that had happened to me in a very long time. And I don't think I should walk out of this restaurant and close that file and go back to something I already know everything about." Lily was watching her now. "I don't know what I'm asking for," Emma said. "I want to be honest about that too. I'm not asking for anything dramatic. I'm not asking you to trust me. You don't know me. And trust takes longer than an evening." She looked at Cooper's sleeping face against Daniel's shoulder, at the trusting, complete weight of him. "I'm asking if there's a version of this where it doesn't end tonight." Silence. The rain. Daniel looked at her for a long time. "That's a lot," he said. "I know. My life isn't simple," he said. "I have 2 kids. I have a business I'm building from nothing. I have a mortgage I'm 2 months behind on because the heating system in the shop failed in January, and I had to choose between fixing it and making the payment." He said it without shame. "This isn't a life that has room for." He gestured, vaguely, at her. "I know," she said. "I'm not asking to fix any of that." "Then what are you asking?" She thought about it. "Coffee," she said. "Next week, if you want." You pick the place, and somewhere that isn't this expensive. A beat, and then we see. Lily, very quietly, looked at her father. Emma could not read the look fully. It was the look of a child who has more opinions than she volunteers, but she thought she saw, in the sharp and careful eyes of this 8-year-old girl who had held her father's hand at a table she'd sat at 100 times, something that was not quite disapproval. Daniel looked at his daughter. Something passed between them. The particular wordless communication of two people who have had to learn to understand each other quickly. "Lily," he said, "what do you think?" Lily looked at Emma for a moment. Then she looked at her father. She came back, Lily said. She didn't have to. It was not a ringing endorsement. But it was a data point, and Emma understood, with some precision, that in this family, data points were presented honestly and then weighed with care. Daniel looked at the card, still sitting on the table. He picked it up. He called on a Thursday. Not the following week, 12 days later, which Emma suspected was intentional. He was not, she was learning, a man who operated on other people's timelines. "There's a diner on Clement Street," he said. "They have good coffee. It's nothing like Thornfield. That's fine." 8:30. "Kids are in school. I'll be there." She was there at 8:15 and ordered coffee and waited and did not check her messages. It required a specific effort that she noted and found interesting. She was, by nature, a person who filled every available interval. On her way to any appointment, she would typically have answered 6 messages, made 2 decisions, and sent 1 piece of feedback that would have cost her assistant considerable effort to interpret. Sitting in a diner booth with her phone face down on the table felt like a physical practice she was not practiced in. She drank her coffee and looked out the window and watched Clement Street wake up. He came in at 8:32 and did not apologize for it. They talked for 2 hours. Not about her company. Not about his shop. They talked about Denver, the full version, which he gave her in pieces, the story of a man who had been walking back to his hotel from dinner and had heard the impact and run toward it rather than away. He talked about the specific decision of staying the call from Claire coming in. The calculation he had made in the dark while crouched beside a woman he didn't know, the judgment that she was stable and conscious and could spare him for the 2 minutes it would take to make sure his wife understood he was coming home. "Did you know she'd be okay?" Emma asked. "When you left?" "No," he said. "I thought she'd be okay." "There's a difference. That bothered you. For a while. Why did you leave?" "You could have waited for the paramedics." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "Because Claire needed me and I knew where she was," he said. "The stranger on the pavement had people coming. My wife had me. Or she had nobody." He paused. "It wasn't a calculation. It was just where I had to be." Emma sat with that. "That's a hard thing to hold," she said. "2 people needing you at the same time. It's the only thing I've ever really struggled with," he said. "Wanting to be enough places." He looked up. "I'm usually not." "Neither am I," she said. He looked at her with what she now understood was his particular form of attention, full, unperformed, directed without agenda. She had been looked at by a great many people in her professional life. She had learned, without consciously intending to read all the versions. The look of someone who wanted something from her. The look of someone who was afraid of her. The look of someone who was trying to determine whether she was a threat or an asset. She had learned to navigate all of these with equal fluency. She did not have a fluent response to being simply seen. "No," he said. "I believe that." They met again the following Thursday, and the Thursday after that. Not always, for coffee once, a walk along the waterfront when the weather was unusually clear, and she had been in a meeting that ran long, and he had suggested, with complete practicality, that walking outside would probably do her more good than wherever she'd planned to eat lunch. Once, unexpectedly, a Saturday afternoon when his regular sitter was available and Lily had a school event, and he called and said there were 4 hours and he didn't know what to do with them, and Emma had said, without thinking, that she knew a good bookstore. They spent 3 hours in the bookstore. Emma bought Cooper a book about prehistoric ocean creatures that she selected based on a 15-second consultation with a bookseller and was told, the following week, had been an enormous success. Cooper had, apparently, read it twice and delivered a summary to his class during show and tell that the teacher had found alarming in its specificity. Lily required longer. The first time Emma saw Lily properly, not in the restaurant, but on a Sunday afternoon, 3 months in, when Daniel brought both children to a farmer's market, and Emma arrived to find that she was, without having signed up for it. Navigating an introduction, Lily regarded her with the bright, assessing eyes of someone who had been thinking about this meeting for some time and had prepared a position. She shook Emma's hand. Emma shook hers. "Dad says you run a company," Lily said. "I do. What does that mean?" "It means I'm responsible for what happens there. The decisions, the mistakes, the results." Lily considered this. "Dad says the same about the shop." "Your dad sounds smart." "He is," Lily said, without any self-consciousness about this. "He's also tired. He doesn't always say so, but I can tell." Emma looked at this child. At the specific, precise honesty of her. At the way she had located, in the first minute of this conversation, the thing that was most true and had said it plainly. The way people do when they have not yet learned to be strategic about their observations. "I can tell too," Emma said quietly. Something in Lily's expression changed. Not warmth, not yet, not fully, but the faint lowering of a guard that had been very carefully maintained. The expression of a child who has decided, provisionally, that this person might be telling the truth. "Okay," Lily said, and went to look at the honey. 8 months later. It was a Sunday in late spring, the kind of Sunday that announces itself without apology. All clear air and long light and the smell of something growing. The particular Sunday that makes it difficult to stay indoors and impossible to be unhappy about being outdoors. Emma had arrived at 11, carrying groceries she had selected with the careful attention she once reserved for acquisition targets, which she recognized as a proportional response issue she had decided not to correct. She was in Daniel's kitchen. This was a sentence that, 8 months ago, would have had no referent in her life. His kitchen was small and slightly cramped, and the overhead light had a flicker that he kept meaning to fix. She knew he kept meaning to fix it because he had mentioned it twice in the same half-apologetic way he mentioned anything in the house that was still on the list, which was a list that had a great deal on it because there were 2 children and a business, and 26 hours of work packed into 24 available hours, and some things simply waited. The window above the sink looked out into a narrow yard where Cooper had recently and enthusiastically built something he called a fort, which was recognizable as a fort primarily through goodwill, and the specific quality of hope that children bring to structural engineering. Emma was cutting tomatoes. She had been assigned tomatoes after a brief and unsuccessful attempt to help with the pasta, which Daniel had reclaimed from her with a patience that she suspected was costing him something. She had, in the intervening months, accepted that cooking was a domain in which she was genuinely not useful, and had decided, without great distress, to work on this over time rather than solve it immediately. This was, she had come to understand, a skill that this household was teaching her. The difference between a problem to be solved and a thing to be learned slowly. The difference between controlling an outcome and participating in a process. "You're thinking," he said, from the stove. "I'm always thinking." "You're thinking loudly. You get a specific face." She looked at him. "Like this," he said, and did a very good impression of the expression she had not known she made when working through a problem. He had a particular talent for mimicry that he deployed rarely and with great precision, and it had the consistent effect of making her laugh before she had decided to. "I do not look like that." "You absolutely look like that." "That is a deeply unflattering impression." "It's accurate," he said. "Accuracy isn't always flattering. Your children are going to grow up thinking honesty is a virtue. That's the intention." Cooper appeared from the direction of the hallway. He had been wearing a pirate hat for most of the afternoon and showed no signs of reconsidering this. He had acquired the hat from a birthday party 2 weeks prior and had integrated it into his daily wardrobe with the total commitment of a person for whom hats are a way of life. "Is dinner almost ready?" he asked. "Almost," Daniel said. "Emma, do you like pirates?" "I have complicated feelings about them historically," Emma said. "But as a conceptual framework, yes." Cooper processed this. "Me too," he said, and disappeared again. Daniel was watching her from the stove with the particular expression she had learned to recognize, the one that looked like amusement but was also something quieter and more deliberate beneath it, something he had started allowing himself in recent months, as though recovering the permission to have it. "You know what I think about," he said, "sometimes. Tell me, the night in the restaurant." He turned back to the pasta. "You walked across that whole room. In front of everybody. The look on that guy's face. Gerald Whitmore. The look on Whitmore's face. I didn't see it." "I did," Daniel said. "I saw you coming. I pretended I didn't, but I did. And I watched his face when you stood up from that table. He looked like someone had changed the rules of a game he thought he understood." Emma considered this. "He called Monday morning," she said. "We finalized the contract." "Of course you did. It was a good deal." The walk across the room didn't change the deal. What did it change? She set down the knife. She looked at him. "Me, I think," she said. The answer was not planned. It was simply the true thing, offered in the manner of this household, which had, through some gradual, unremarked process, become a place where true things were preferred, where the standard for saying something out loud was not whether it was strategic or advantageous, but simply whether it was real. He looked at her over his shoulder. "Yeah," he said. "I think so too." There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just inhabited. The kind of pause this kitchen had accustomed her to. She had learned that silence, here, was not a vacuum to be filled, but a texture, a thing with its own presence. She had spent her professional life treating silence as a negotiating tool, a space to be managed. She was slowly learning to simply be in it. Lily came in from the backyard with dirt on her knees and a small purple wildflower that she examined with the focused attention of a scientist who has made a significant find and is assessing the proper protocol. She set it on the windowsill above the sink and stepped back and looked at it. "It needs water," she announced to no one in particular. "There's a glass in the cabinet," Emma said. Lily found the glass, filled it precisely, not too much, not too little, with the exactitude she brought to everything, set the flower in it, stepped back and assessed again, making the small adjustment of moving it 2 inches toward the light. "Good," she said. Daniel served the pasta. Cooper returned, still wearing the hat, now also carrying a small plastic dinosaur that he set on the table beside his plate, as though it were a dinner companion who had been invited and whose presence required no explanation. Emma found napkins in the 3rd drawer she had learned. At some point, where the napkins were, along with the location of the spare batteries, the drawer that stuck in humidity, and the fact that the back left burner ran hot and had to be adjusted and set 4 places at the table that was genuinely too small for 4 people, if any of them wanted elbow room. Nobody mentioned the elbow room. They all sat. Cooper said grace, which he did with the cheerful economy of a 6-year-old who has been told this is expected and has negotiated it down to its essential components. "Thanks for the food. Thanks for the day. Amen." He delivered it with the businesslike efficiency of someone who understands that the content is not the point, the form is, and the form had been satisfied. Lily poured her own water. Daniel passed the bread. Cooper introduced the dinosaur to Emma as Gerald, which caused Daniel to make a sound into his napkin. "Gerald," Emma said. "He's very important," Cooper said. "I don't doubt it." Emma looked at the table. She thought about Thornfield, the frosted glass, the ivy, the carefully engineered warmth that cost a great deal of money to look effortless. She thought about Gerald Whitmore and his yacht deck tan and his lawyer who clicked his pen. She thought about the version of herself who had sat in that corner booth and understood, without examination, that negotiation was the primary mode of human interaction. She thought about a voice in the dark and the specific, irreducible truth of, "You're still here." She thought about the fact that she had, in the past 8 months, laughed more genuinely, argued more honestly, and felt more clearly located in her own life than she had in the preceding decade. She had also cried once, privately, in her car after a difficult conversation with Daniel about what it meant to be present for someone without making them a project, because he had said it carefully and kindly, and she had heard, beneath the kindness, the truth of it, which was that she had a lifelong habit of solving rather than staying. She had needed a minute with that. She had then gone back inside and said, "You're right, and I'm working on it." He had looked at her for a moment. Then he had said, "I know. So am I. Emma." Cooper said, through a mouthful of bread that suggested his table manners were still in development. "Do you think the pasta is good?" "I think it's excellent," she said. "Dad made it." "I know. Dad's a good cooker." "He is," Emma said. Among other things, Daniel looked at her. He was trying not to smile and losing the effort incrementally. She let him try. Outside, the light was going the particular gold of a spring evening that doesn't last long enough, the kind that makes people stop in doorways and look at it without knowing exactly why, the kind that feels like it contains something that can't quite be translated into language, but is felt clearly in the chest. Somewhere in the narrow yard, Cooper's fort stood in its approximate way, holding its approximate shape against the evening. The flickering light above the table held. Emma picked up her fork. She thought, "This is where I want to be." Not because it was easy, it wasn't, and wouldn't be. There were still the long weeks and the small crises, and the particular difficulty of learning to be part of something without trying to run it. There was still the mortgage and the heating system and the gaps in the budget that she had to actively, consciously resist fixing. Because she had learned slowly, with effort, that Daniel's dignity lived in the honest solving of his own problems, and she could offer her company without offering her checkbook. There was still the work of it. The daily, imperfect, ongoing work of two people from entirely different worlds, finding a language they could both speak without either of them translating themselves out of existence. But the work was real. The table was real. The girl who moved flowers toward the light was real. And the boy who had named his dinosaur Gerald was real, and the man who had once crouched on cold pavement in Denver and said, "You're still here," with the calm of someone who had decided it simply as fact, he was more real to her than anything she had built or acquired or negotiated into existence. She took a bite of the pasta. "This is very good," she said. "I know," Daniel said. "You said that like you expected it." "I did expect it." Cooper, deciding this was an appropriate moment for a toast, raised his water glass with the solemnity of a person who takes ceremonies seriously. "To dinner," he said. "To dinner," Lily agreed, with the gravity of a much older person who is indulging a tradition she finds slightly beneath her but values nonetheless. Daniel raised his. Emma raised hers. The glasses met with the small, clear sound of glass touching glass, and Cooper said clink because the sound itself wasn't quite enough for him. "And Lily," said Cooper, and Cooper said what? And Daniel looked at Emma over the top of his glass with an expression she had no name for and didn't need one. They ate. Outside, the gold light held for another long, unhurried minute, the kind of minute that doesn't know its ending before it gave way to the blue of evening. And the table stayed warm long after the sun was gone, lit by the flickering overhead light that Daniel kept meaning to fix and hadn't yet, which Emma had stopped minding, because she had come to understand that the flicker was part of it, part of the honest, imperfect, alive thing that this was. That night, she hadn't just dropped her fork. She had remembered, for the first time in a very long time, what she actually wanted, and she had been brave enough not to leave before finding out.